Hello, everyone. Welcome. So this is about expanding to the US. And one of the problems with expanding to the US is there's unbelievable numbers of choices you need to make. When do you start? What should you do? How should you hire people? What are the legal risks? So over the past months at SeedLegals, as we've been looking to expand to the US, we've need to figure out all of these ourselves. And I thought, rather than us just figuring out and you spending all the time figuring it out, why don't we get on a call with experts, make a checklist of all the things you need to do so that when you're looking to expand to the US, either to launch sales or to do a Delaware flip, there's a simple playbook of do this, do this, do this. The cost of it will be dramatically lower than before, and you'll know exactly what to do. And importantly for the US, it seems the things not to do, because if you do some things in the wrong order, it creates problems for you. So now, please meet Joanne, who is the expert on this. Joanne, introduce yourself.
My name's Joanne Farquharson. I'm president and CEO of Foothold America. We have offices in the US, in the UK. I'm here in the south of France. We have an entity here. And my passion is helping the world expand into the USA. So I look forward to hearing your questions because Anthony and I can do a lot of generalized talking, but it's really very specific to your situation. So I look forward to interacting with you.
Okay, so any questions, pop them on the chat. We'll get to them. We've got, of course, our set of topics. You've got some water there. I've got some tea. We are good to go. All right, so let's start with some common misconceptions. You've got a bunch that you'd like to go through, which might be the set of things to think about, including, I'm sure, the US is not one country, it's 50 states, but take it away.
Oh, that's one of the best ones, yeah. And it's funny because oftentimes the U.S. is made compared to Europe in that there's a whole bunch of different countries and all the rules are different. And so in some ways that is true. Another misconception about the space of the United States is that you should just pick one that you've heard of. You ought to go to New York or LA, or if you're biotech, you ought to go to Boston. And there are many more options for that. And so it will change from our first conversations with someone after you dig down into what are some of the things that they're interested in. Another one that may seem obvious, but it's whatever we're doing in the UK that's working will absolutely work in the US. And of course, you wouldn't say that to yourself. It's, however, you may be sort of heading in the direction of thinking through your expansion based on the experience you had in your growth in the UK, and they can be dramatically different. How you're marketing your product, etc. I think post-COVID, I see less of this, but pre-COVID, for sure, people thought, I need to have an office. Even if it's just a hot desk or something, I should have a physical location. And for sure, that has changed to a virtual office is fine. I just need an address, and that's true. So that's changed a bit. And the other thing is, in order for me to be successful in the US, we have to send either the founder or some key people, because otherwise it'll never be the same. We won't be able to import our culture into the US. So unless we send one of these key folks, and I've seen that happen over and over again. Sometimes the visa process is very confusing or lengthy, and they go, you know what, we found the right person and we don't even need to go there except for some trips back and forth. So I'd say those are the assumptions that people come into our conversations with.
All right, cool. And I'm guilty of some of those. So let's see if I'm still need to change at the end of this. All right, certainly the founder getting on a plane and going to New York is one of them. So Before we dive in, so that's a great set of things. So before we dive in, tell me why people come to Foothold, how you help them, what are the services you do, and then from that expertise, we'll dive into all of those so that everyone knows the game plan.
Sure, sure. So the things that we actually do are help businesses set up their US entities, and we help businesses hire their US employees and stay compliant on everything related to people operations. However, that work can touch many other specialties like legal, like tax, like visas, like IP protection. And those are some of the things that you want to consider sometimes in coordination. So even if we don't provide those services, we have a robust ecosystem of partners who will be the right fit for this company, but not so much for this. And we have made our business on SMBs. So we will not be referring you to the big four accounting firms. We have relationships, for example, with a firm that does just US and UK tax, for example. So, and yeah, same thing with immigration attorneys. Some of them are, are very, very extensive firms, and others are one or two people who are experts. So we'll connect you with our resources in a way that makes sense for your budget and your company culture.
Okay, all right. So that's great. So if you want to sort of wing it yourself with articles in the internet, go for it. If you're looking for somebody to help with every step, call 1-800-Foothold America. All right. So now we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about the things that I'm doing at SeedLegals, not to say that they're successful, but you've heard of building in public. Maybe this I'm calling expanding in public. So we're going to look at starting from the top of the funnel, should I expand to the US? And then we're also going to talk about raising investment in the US and maybe flipping to the US, because for the biggest issue I see is people wanting to expand and particularly raise investment in the US and flip to a Delaware company for the wrong reasons. So let's start with the expansion. So expansion is, it said there's some nice advice from Octopus Ventures, which is go early or go late, but don't go in the middle. So if you are, a couple of founders, get on a plane, go to Silicon Valley, get a garage, work from there. Or if you have multi-million-pound a year revenue, and you can afford to spend and potentially lose $1 million or $2 million on a US adventure, and you've productized your UK offering, then that's a good time to grow the business. The less good time is you're still trying to find product market fit in the UK. You don't have a great deal of revenue, and now you are expanding. Now, one of the things I've discovered at SeedLegals, which might also help on your decision making, is we are blessed to get a great number of incomings from particularly US VCs. They want to know about SeedLegals and investing. And as soon as we mention, we're expanding to the US, it's always, that sounds amazing. Call us back when you've got a foothold in the US and you've got traction there. So there seem to be two stable hypotheses for raising investment. One of them is it's a successful UK company. Don't talk about the rest of the world. You're showing your growth. You're super focused there. And the second one is you're a now US and UK and US company. You've got traction and will invest in the business based on the US size of market, the US growth, and at a US valuation. And then it doesn't really matter, for the most part, that your company is a UK company or a Delaware company. And the reason I'm mentioning all of this is it was a mild surprise to me that when I spoke to VCs, I thought about, tantalizing with the US as an interesting upsell. Hey, the growth is great here, great revenue. It could be more here. But as soon as I mentioned that, it was a come back later moment. So for me, I was actually quite happy with that. I wasn't desperate. They called me. But if you are looking to fundraise, you might think carefully about the stable position. Has nothing to do with the US, or I'm already in the US, but be careful about fundraising when you're in the middle. The other thing to note on the fundraising side, and then we'll get back to the expansion piece, is that I find often when I see founders posting in chat groups about wanting to fundraise in the US, the reasons they're doing it are probably not going to lead to success. And it's often the reason is I was unable to find investment from UK investors, so I'm going to go to the US. And I see Joanne nodding there. And so I think, if you know the 5 whys, for those who don't know it, 5 whys is if something doesn't work, you ask the question why 5 levels deep to get to the answer. And the origin came from, I think, Boeing. Maybe they need to call it someone else now. But the windshield fell out of the plane. They thought it was metal fatigue or something on the screws. They asked, why did the screws fall out? It's because the wrong screws were put in. Why were the wrong screws put in? Because the operator, the mechanic, picked the wrong ones. Why did they pick the wrong ones? Because they were tired. Why did they not notice? Because the labeling on the box was wrong. So the problem is completely separate to where you think. And so when I see UK founders talking about raising from US investors, I like to think about the 5 whys. And it's often people couldn't understand the pitch deck, or they didn't see signs of traction, or they weren't sure that you would execute. And changing that to US investors isn't really going to change anything. Sometimes, of course, it's possible that the risk reward, you're doing a social network, UK investors don't like that, maybe US ones do. But often swapping one problem space for another means you now might be more difficult finding US investors because you don't know them. Time zones are different. They mostly want to invest in US companies. You're going to go to a lot of work trying to persuade them that you'll be in the US. And instead, you're better off trying to focus on fixing the core problem. So, Joanne, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. For sure, the way you've described go early, go late makes so much sense. And I would say the folks that the majority of people that we work with are the go late. So they have proof of concept. They have a stable structure, revenue stream in the UK or the other places where they've expanded. And then they're looking at the US, and they almost always have some sales in the US. Now, that's not true when they're pre-revenue and have funding and they're using some of that funding to expand to get more funding, those kinds of scenarios. But mostly there's stability in the UK. There's evidence of the market in the US, and generally, because many of our tech clients are SaaS clients, they've sold it and they can see that it's working. That's not to say that they shouldn't still do go-to-market research, things like that, but they're getting pretty strong evidence that they can go there. And I mean, there's lots of statistics out there. So about 25% of all UK tech companies expand to the US. So if you're a tech founder out there, there may be some, depending on what your product is, if it's specific to a UK need, then maybe not. But people are going all the time. And so this is not pioneering. And sure, there's, you have to get some things right, but there's no reason that you can't do it. You're an entrepreneur. If you're on this call and you've founded and grown something, you can do this. It's a matter of it's doing some of the pieces beforehand.
Got it. And that's exactly what this call is about, which is about explaining the desires, of course, but also taking huge numbers of months and decision making out of it. Okay, actually, it's really simple. You need to do A, B, and C. Don't do D at all, and definitely don't do E before you've done that, or they'll never let you in the country again. So now let's go through it. So you've decided you want to expand in the US. Let's put this in a few levels. So level 1, we'll call it, is, you've got essentially a global product. So all you need to do is make sure your website looks good in the US, make sure they're dollar symbols instead of pound symbols, set Stripe to charge in dollars. Nobody needs to get on a plane. Your risk is minimal. But you may find that, of course, you just turn it on and nobody comes. So now comes, how do you develop the market? And this is where it gets more complicated, of course, because that might mean boots on the ground. So your business might be B2B enterprise sales.
Mm-hmm.
It might be SMEs, smaller business sales, which is really SeedLegal's case. It might be to consumers. So the question then is, do you need people on the ground, and where on the ground to develop that, or could you do it remotely? And in our case, we found that, if you know the terms product-led growth and community-led growth, product-led growth, and I'm saying everything here is a general use for everyone. Product-led growth is build it and they will come. Community-led growth is be part of communities where your customers hang out and be prominent in those communities. If you sell tea, where do tea lovers hang out online or magazines, whatever? In the case of startups, they look for the same resource. So if you want to hang out there. And in our case, we think community-led growth is important. So we want to be part of the communities in the US. Otherwise, we think we'll just open, the door and no one will come. So now let's get to getting people on the ground in the US. So one of the things I've heard is that one of the common mistakes companies make is they hire senior people in the US too early. And the first hire is usually a marketing person. And then it turns out the only thing they could market was themselves, because they're Americans, they're dialed up to 11. The first one you meet, you think they're awesome, but it turns out they all talk like that, and actually there's often little substance. And now you've maybe spending $200,000 a year on someone's New York, marketing salary, and you've got little to show for it. So tell me what you see in the space, and do you have any recommendations? And then I'll dive in.
Sure. So in general, if you're enterprise sales, you're likely putting boots on the ground a little bit earlier than if you're SMB. You're absolutely on the mark for product versus community-led or sales-led. I have seen different scenarios play out very successfully in regard to the level of the employees you first hire. So, for example, when a company, say the founder is moving to the US, and you go, okay, this person built it before, is now living here, and is owning the expansion, sure, you can bring in mid-level sales folks or community builders, things like that, to support you. That makes a lot of sense. And what's super critical, if the founder isn't going, is to say, okay, we're focused on community building, or maybe some paid advertising, things like that, bringing our brand to the US. And we're not sending anyone, but we have a chief commercial officer who has capacity to really focus on the US, even if they're not physically going to be there except for maybe a couple of trips a year. Then you can get, have a mid to upper level business development person who's there, because they can take the initiative, they can make things happen without a C-suite country manager, right next to them. And that is super important. I think, especially post-COVID, actually, even before COVID, probably 95% of the employees that we hired on behalf of our clients and our clients hired were working remotely, because they were at the time getting on a plane or meeting locally. So you need that self-starter, and that self-starter doesn't need to be in the US at the C-suite, so you can avoid that. However, I would, at least half of our clients will choose a very senior person. It might not be the CEO, it might be a VP or a C-suite who is in charge of commercial growth. But the key there is, I think Americans are very enamored with titles. And so they, may have a chief title or a director title. Directors are very different sounding in the, in the US than they mean something very different in the UK. So, so then they may want that title, but what's going to be critical is, are you the strategic thinker, or are you able to pound the street and make the sales come in? And that's ultimately what you want, whether it's, Anthony in New York hires a junior team, or the commercial C-suite in the UK hires a fairly senior level.
Okay, great intel. And by the way, about job title, inflation and reliance, that's one of the things that I've noticed. So if I look at pitch decks in the UK or talk to founders, they're mostly talking about the product, the problem you're solving, the product. In the US, it's about the credentials of the team, the senior lead at Tesla, SpaceX, and Facebook/Meta, whatever. You barely get it. There was a criticism of one of the last YC, Y Combinator demo days, where people spent so much talking about themselves, they didn't even explain what they were doing. So you may find that you are feeling quite insecure when you start talking to US people and they tell you about their amazing achievements and zillions they've raised. I think
true. It's true. There is, and I didn't realize this. I lived in the U.S., born there, lived there till I was almost 50 years old before I lived in the U.K. for 5 years, and now here in France. And you don't even realize it until you meet very polite British people who are quite humble and downplay, their own expertise, or you are taught, I see this now, you're taught to promote yourself. You're taught to be an individual. And there's, look out for number one. That's all, you're number one. You've got to always look out for yourself. So there is that mentality. And, there are obviously downsides to that. As you said, Anthony, people can, kind of inflate their competencies, their experience, things like that. The upside to that is that Americans can often believe, I can do it. They have the can-do attitude, growth mindset, and are very optimistic in general. So, you've got a little bit of both, but they absolutely were used to promoting ourselves. And that, when you describe the pitch decks, that makes a lot of sense. And when your UK VCs are looking, they're like, okay, product, that's product, but who's behind it? What are they about? They will want to know more about the people, and it just coming culturally from a different place.
Got it. Okay, so takeaway point for everyone is you got to dial it up to 11. Don't be British modest. If everything's not awesome, people assume it's terrible. So, all right, now let's talk very quickly about the rate at which you scale up in the US, because I think this is where, if you do it too modestly, great, you're not betting the future of the company on it, but you may not see much growth. Get too ambitious, and you may be setting yourself up for failure. And I was talking to a UK company, they'd raised 10 million plus, 100 plus people, and they set up their New York office with fancy offices and 10 people on day one. And they've realized, this was on B2B enterprise sales, that actually it's taking longer to localize the product. Sales cycle times for their B2B enterprise customers are really long. And they're kind of bleeding quite a lot of money on those 10 people at New York salaries and a New York office. And they're probably looking to shrink a little bit. So the takeaway there was because they'd raised quite a lot, they'd made quite a lavish bet. And maybe they should have done it at half the size and some co-working hot desk space instead of a fancy office. Any thoughts on what you see from your customers who you say are Series A? What is their land in US scale proposition initially?
Sure. So there are lots of scenarios, but just the way you described that, absolutely. Like immediately I cringed a bit, fancy New York. And a couple of decades ago, that may have been a good bet, but you just don't need it. So I'll tell you a story about one of our clients, which is one of my favorites. So they're a UK biotech gene discovery firm, and they had one employee in the US C-suite, and that they were using our employer of record service. So employer of record means that they don't have a US entity, and we hire that person on their behalf. So they were primarily building in the UK. This one senior person was very much connected with the C-suite in the UK and had a powerful impact in terms of getting the product out there. And it was probably after 5 years, 7 years, they went public on the New York Stock Exchange after having just one employee there. And this is, I'm just going to tell you the story because it makes me so happy. But of course, this person got a small bit of equity when they started, and they had a tremendous IPO. And as you can think about it, this person had equity in a UK company. They didn't have a US company. They were our employee. And here they are getting their payout after all those years when it goes IPO. And so we were involved only because the due diligence says you must, when you pay out this amount, you have to make sure that that person pays their taxes. So we were the conduit to pay those taxes. So $3 million came through Foothold America on behalf of one employee. That was the tax they had to pay on their shares. And so what a beautiful example of a tiny, tiny footprint and a wonderful expansion. After their IPO, they did set up a US entity, and they grew their team from there. But it can be done in a very lean, mean way.
Okay, all right. So that's a great segue to the exciting thing of employment and taxes. So if you want to, so let's go through the scenarios and then let's guide everyone, because this can take months of decision making. And I think for most startups, the answer is going to be remarkably the same. It's probably going to be one of 2 or 3 scenarios. And if everyone can understand that, it's going to save you a lot of wasted time. So scenario 1 is you've got a few folks in the US all working for your UK company, and we're going to discuss how to do that. Scenario 2 is you create a US subsidiary and you have everyone employed through the US subsidiary, and we'll look at that. And maybe the scenario 3 is this employee of record and so on, which is a slight hybrid thing. So the way we are going is one of the key things that I understand is you want to create a US subsidiary that will shield taxes and liability from the UK topco. So you might have a vibrant UK topco. We've all heard that Americans are very litigious. If you establish a tax presence or a liability presence from your UK company in the US, you open the door to more problems than you might have wanted, particularly when you're exploring a new market. If you create a US company, you can shield that within the US company. So when I've interviewed US founders for setting up their companies, many of them have made elementary mistakes, like setting up a Wyoming LLC instead of a Delaware C Corp. So very quickly, just on company types, broadly, there are 2 options. LLC, limited liability corporation, is a tax pass-through. So any profits made by the company are taxed from the shareholders of the company. A Delaware C corporation is like a UK limited company. The profits of the company are kept by the company and paid as taxes, or paid as things. So if you're ever planning to fundraise in the US, you want to create a Delaware C corporation. If you're an Etsy jeweler and you're wanting a trading entity for liability or for Amazon, or whatever it is, then you can create an LLC. But otherwise, an LLC may cause you endless numbers of problems with taxation and so on, and inability to raise investment if it's your top co. So now with those scenarios, Joanne, over to you on, you're a UK company looking to expand in the US. which of these scenarios should you go for. Maybe you start with one and then graduate to the other. And once everyone understands that, then they'll know exactly what to do.
Right. Okay. So yes, in terms of the structure, I completely agree with you because we exclusively work with international companies expanding to the US. Many of those countries have tax treaties with the US. And so most of the time, and I would say nearly 100% of the time for our UK clients, they set up the C Corp and they set it up in Delaware. And for just the reasons you said. Now, in terms of which is Topco, it doesn't, I mean, say, if you've got your UK company and it's been set up well in advance of your US, just because you set up a Delaware C Corp doesn't mean that it's a subsidiary. You'll be registering in the state and you'll say, these are the people who own this corporation. And you're thinking to yourself, well, the UK limited company owns it. But Delaware doesn't want that information. They don't want to know what entity. Ultimately, they want to know the people. So the people are going to be the names that go down there. And what determines what's Topco and what's not is how you do your taxes and how you do your transfer pricing. So it's not so much the actual setup, it's what you do with it tax-wise. So when you report your taxes, how you're reporting them with your transfer pricing. So when that comes to, I'll switch over to employees. We don't let me get too far into the tax conversation. But so when you decide to set up a U.S. entity, you and you do want boots on the ground, you have a couple of options for hiring employees. When, for the most part, you're not hiring 40 people at once. I mean, some people are, but for the most part, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 20 after a year and a half. And the PEO is a concept that's very common in the US and is not something that a lot of non-US folks know about. PEO stands for Professional Employer Organization. It's considered a co-employment model. So the PEO, the organization, is taking on a portion of the employer risks for you. So it's a bundled service, essentially. So payroll, benefits, compliance, taxes, both your corporate withholding taxes from salaries and the employees' taxes. And they manage those pieces of it. You're responsible for things like making sure the person is allowed to work in the US, managing them, all of that. And it's a great way to protect your entity by saying, all right, all of this difficult stuff with people in different states and different rules, we are going to work with a PEO partner to make sure that they do the really hard stuff and we do the actual people management stuff.
Okay, so let me dive in. So as a UK company, you're completely used to, you employ people directly. It's very unlikely you use any of these outside things. You just have people on your payroll. Every month you pay PAYE and NI to the government, and you pay your employee. And at some point you're going to use payroll software or Teams HR software like Bob or others. In the US, the issue is that it's not one country, there are 50 states. And each of the states where you employ people have got slightly different laws. So when you're a large company, you might insource all of this. But when you're a small company, particularly if you don't know US, it's way too much effort. And so you outsource the entire HR function to this professional employment organization. And they essentially mask everything, so there's just your team and they sort out things at a state level, and of course they're going to charge you something for that. And is that a service that Foothold provides?
It is. It is a service that we provide, but I'd say for anywhere from honestly maybe 5 employees on up, and this could be to hundreds, you can use a PEO, and you can also got a fly in my office. And you can also hire directly. In terms of scaling, that is a great scaling from a people perspective. That's a wonderful tool to use. And also scaling from a revenue perspective, it's a very cost-effective tool.
So let me talk about one thing, which is I've done some webinars with Daniel Glazer from Wilson Sonsini, who focuses a lot on US expansion. And one of the things he gives is probably his key bit of advice is never, ever hire somebody as an employee in the US from your UK company, because it's going to create a US tax presence and a liability presence. So does doing it as a, so there then seem to be two possibilities. You've got your team, they're moving to the US. As soon as, if they're on holiday on an Esther or something, they're still your employee. But as soon as it becomes something permanent, you as I understand it, and I'm going to look to you for the answer, you at some point very quickly don't want them as an employee of your UK company. It means either a PEO employee of the UK company, or a PO employee of the US company, or an EOR, an employee of record. So tell us what each of those are, and then which is the solution, because endless amounts of thinking goes into this, but actually, there's a simple rule book of if you're doing this, this is the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say for those that are tiptoeing in, and you go, we just we're building community there. We can afford to pay one person. We're not sending a team over. And you think to yourself, well, we can manage the liability of our UK business, our IP and taxes and things like that. And we simply want to test the waters. It's very common to use employer of record. So no US entity, it's a UK company signing a contract with an employer of record company. That person hires your employee that you've chosen, or you've used a recruiter to find. And then that employee works for the employer of record as sort of, that's the behind the scenes, get all these compliance things done. But this person feels like they're working for your UK company. So it's a super inexpensive, no long-term contract. Get out in 30 days if you decide this isn't working, or the employee isn't working, or you focus elsewhere in your company. And it's a great place to start. If you are immediately seeking funding, or you've got some IP concerns, and you, for whatever reason, you might have a huge contract with Google and they say you must have a US entity. You may start with your US entity. And then in that case, because you do have a US entity, you can choose to use a PEO. You have to have a US entity and a US bank account in order to do that. The employer of record, you don't need entity or US bank account. So you can go either way. The employer of record is more expensive because you're taking no risk. So once you do have that entity, it probably makes sense to shift over to your EIN, your U.S. employer identification number, and bringing that employee under your umbrella in the U.K. But like I said, that one example, that person was on the employer of record service. Right. They had no U.S. entity for 5 years. Now, you want to talk to your tax folks, because that's not to say they didn't owe tax from their UK company for sales in the U.S. So, you have to kind of gather your information from the lawyer, from the tax advisor, from the people professional, and kind of make your decision based on all of those factors. But employer of record is an absolutely reasonable place to go, especially if you are thinking, I need to get a bit more traction to justify putting bigger money in, or to position ourselves for the VC. So super easy to do employer of record. And then again, once the entity is in place, it may make sense to move over. And we transition companies from EOR to PEO every month.
Okay.
So
right. Great, thank you. Let's switch to bank accounts. You mentioned bank accounts. So, that one of the things that I'm now discovering is you want to rent an apartment in New York. It's they ask all sorts of stuff about what your salary is in the US and the bank account and a bunch of other things. So, bank accounts, do you need to set up a high street, or they call it a bricks and mortar, I think, bank? Right. Or is a Wise bank account sufficient?
Great question. So, pre-COVID, it's funny how much of this really has changed with COVID. Pre-COVID, we would talk to people and say, you're going to need to come to the States, bring all your IDs and your company registration and go into a bank and open your account. That no longer is the case because the bricks and mortar banks now realize, hey, there's lots of business to be done here, and we can know our customers with documents that are going back and forth. You may have to mail some documents, but you can't get a business bank account that's associated with a U.S. company unless you open that U.S. company. However,
Right.
you can do lots of things with U.S. dollars through companies like Wise. There's plenty of options now. Using a USD account through Wise is an example, and you'll be able to use the two critical numbers. In the UK, it's the source code and account number. In the US, it's a routing number. Right. UK would say routing number, but everybody in the US says it's a routing number and an account number. And you can get that through many of your online banks or a foreign exchange kind of company like that. Or even if you're using HSBC or an international bank in the UK, depending on if your revenue is high enough, they may offer you a USD account as well. So you can do business, both bringing in revenue or paying an employee without a US account.
Okay. All right. So thank you. Now, one of the first things I discovered with the US is they've got all this different terminology. So one of the questions was about a 1099, I think, or something. So take us through some of the strange terminology that you may hear, what it means and how to get it sorted.
Great. And I know this is very employment heavy, people heavy. But a 1099 is the equivalent of an independent contractor in the in the UK, a sole proprietor. It's someone who works independently and has their own liability insurance and pays taxes on their own. So it can be thought to be an attractive person to hire. That way you don't have to provide benefits and get into all this employee type stuff. You'll just use a contractor. The US is much like the UK in that if you have an employment relationship, I'm going to say, Anthony, you need to be, working from 9 to 5, and here's our training, and you need to do it this way. When you are managing people, they're not independent. They're not independent contractors. And some states will say you can't hire someone as an independent contractor to do the thing that your business does. For example, if you're a SaaS company and and this person is selling your SaaS product for you, you can't hire them as an independent contractor. You could hire an independent accountant to help you. You don't have to employ them. You could hire an independent contractor. But if they're providing your service and you are managing them, you will be misclassifying your employee if you call them an independent contractor. And 1099 refers to the actual tax document that the company has to submit to the IRS. So they'll say, I paid Anthony Rose $200,000 last year as my independent contractor. Here it is on this 1099. If you hire an employee and you go, actually, Jane is our employee and works for us full-time or even part-time, but there's an employment relationship. They are often referred to as a W-2. A W-2 is the tax document that businesses send to the IRS. My employee Jane was paid X amount. and has paid this amount. We've paid this amount of taxes, so that Jane also gets that W-2, and she reports to the IRS because everybody in the US does a tax return every year. She says, this company paid me X amount, so the IRS will get the two documents, and that's what will reflect an employment relationship. But yeah, you'll hear, are they a 1099 or are they a W-2? Yes.
Sounds like a murder thing on a crime series, but okay, we've got a 1099 on Highway 4. Okay, now so which site can people go to understand what applies in which state? I want to hire somebody in California or in Texas. I'm guessing the rules are different. You know, what's the minefield that how do you resolve that?
So good question. The 1099 bit, independent contractor, is a federal law. So in general, the federal laws are the overarching umbrella, and the state laws can be different as long as they're not less than the federal laws. So it's called federal supremacy. So essentially, if this doesn't exist, but say the federal government says all employees have to have 10 days of leave, sick leave every year, then none of the states could say, well, we only want to give 3.
Got it. Yeah.
But they can. California, for example, is very employee friendly. They may say, well, we're going to give 15, and anyone employed here must give 15. So that's just an example of trying to figure out, well, I found this incredible talent in LA and I want to hire them, but what do I have to do so I don't get in trouble in California versus this and that? So if you're a DIY kind of person, you can absolutely go to human resources and check these things out and have your HR people build it themselves. In general, though, much of HR is outsourced in the US. So you want someone looking after these ever-changing laws for you.
Right, cool. So now let's switch, and then lastly, and then we'll go to a few of the questions in the chat. So location. So to me, it seems they fall into kind of 4 categories. One, there's New York because it's close, it's 5 hours, time zone difference, good overlap with UK, not too far to travel, maybe a bit, it's a big market and maybe closer to European mentality. Number 2 is Bay Area, San Francisco, anything to do with VC funding. It's the hot place, but it's further away and big time zone difference and hard to get everyone on a call at the same time with UK. Number 3 is lifestyle. So maybe Florida or something like that. You like the sunshine. And number 4 is, some progressive state in terms of company employment or other law. Maybe, you see Texas and so on. So what do you see most companies doing?
So it absolutely depends on their objectives. So as we said, you might register in Delaware, your corporation.
Yeah,
that does not mean
it's always exactly. Yeah. No one actually lives in Delaware.
Right, yeah. It's a teeny tiny state. So so that part doesn't matter. But say you decide I'm going to have like say for you, I'm going to move to New York because you're going to grow your community there. That makes a lot of sense. So having if your objective is to be in the concentration of where the clients are, then that may drive it. If your intention is if it's sales driven, then you want to find out where the talent is. And so it could be in a hub. So for example, Boston is a life sciences hub. You may not be doing clinical trials there, but you may want someone enmeshed in the ecosystem. So maybe you'll go there. But the entire East Coast is 5 hours from the UK. So you can have, people anywhere along there that are going to be able to interact. So the time zone management is fine. We used to have people, our headquarters officially is still in Boston. But most of our team is in Tampa. And the first time we hired in Tampa was because we knew we could get a more senior, more capable person for 30% lower cost than we could in Boston, and our team has grown there. So, well, I mean, we do have some in New York, and so it depends. Is it talent driven? And you go, okay, well, Research Triangle Park in North Carolina is a lovely hub, life science, biotech, and other techs. So maybe we want to go there, where the cost of living is good and the talent is great. But also someone will say, I met someone at a trade show. They're perfect for us, and they live in Ohio. Okay. Great.
Okay, so it's going to vary, and it might be where the customers are, where your first hire is, what your lifestyle thing. All right, now before we go to the questions, last one, which is cost. So, how much should you allow for setting up a US entity and the things we've discussed so far? If someone, for example, would come to Foothold to do that.
Right. Okay. So this is kind of crazy. Set up an entity. It can be a couple of $100s if you do it online. You do. I can figure this out. I'm smart. Those systems are made from the perspective of, like, if they ask you questions, the decision tree is going to be thinking that you're an American, and so they're going to respond in that way. On the other hand, if you go to your attorney, probably about $5,000 for the setup, and then there's the in between, which is where Foothold America falls. So again, we're focused on international companies and we handhold, but we're also not a law firm. So that's for that. When it comes, just a couple of quick numbers, in general, to hire for the same position, whatever you're paying in the UK, you'll pay 30 to 50% more in the US. So you get to convert from pounds to dollars. So that's a little helpful. But, if you're paying 100,000 in the UK, then you're going to pay 130, 150, depending on where you are in the US. And then on top of that, when you think, well, what are the taxes? The taxes in the US, when you go, okay, there's social tax and things like that. They do have a little social safety net. It doesn't seem very high, but when you add health insurance, which is not required by law unless you're a larger employer, but it is absolutely expected for you to offer health insurance. So that $100,000 will become 135, 140,000 after your taxes, insurance fees, and benefits are paid. So just quick math, you pay someone this much in the UK, add 30 to 50%, there's your salary, add 35 to 40% on that. And that's why this can be so daunting to take that first step. It's a bit of sticker shock.
Okay. All right. So that was immensely valuable. Thank you. Now, how can people find you?
Oh, well, I won't tell you what my email address is because my last name is Farquharson. And some of you, if you're Scottish out there, you might know how to spell it. But footholdamerica.com, that's our website, and you can connect. And yep, I'm on LinkedIn. So it's Joanne Farquharson. I'd love to connect with you. Our entire team follows every client of ours. We will, promote you, and we do become part of your team. So I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. It would be my pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, quick question. So Katie says, we're SaaS focused on enterprise products. We're looking at state license agreements. Do you have any experience with license agreement partnerships?
What is the type of software?
I guess then Katie should just follow up with you directly.
Probably, yeah, because it's going to depend on. If she's speaking about just licensing to do business, then yes, you'd have to register in the states where you're doing business. If you have an employee, you absolutely have to register. If you sold your enterprise software to someone in California, a business in California, then it depends on registration if you hit a tax nexus. So if you've hit the tax threshold, then you'd have to register. And it's not an easy answer, but that's what it will depend upon.
All right. Then there's an interesting point, which is Canada might be a stepping stone to the US. It might be easier, cheaper to base yourself in Canada and then sell from there. Any thoughts on that?
Sure, sure. And so that I think that one is probably driven more by lifestyle, if that's you prefer to live there. But also, depending on the industry that you're in, there can be advantages to going to one country or another because of regulatory reasons. So if what you offer is going to be easier to get licensed in Canada, for example. And this year, I wish I could be very specific about this, but we've had so many Canada companies coming for US entities. And I think there's been a change in some Canadian laws that have somehow made some aspects of doing business more challenging in Canada. And in that case, when someone is wanting to expand to Canada, we would refer to someone in our ecosystem. But absolutely, they're, like brothers and sisters. We're the mean younger brother.
All right. Okay. Then cool. And the last question, which was about SEIS, Advanced Assurance, Delaware Flips. That's my area of expertise. So drop me a note, Atul, on that one, and I'll point you to an article, and maybe we need to do some more content on that as well. So that's interesting. All right. Thank you, everyone. If you got any questions, please, for Foothold America. And if you are planning to be in the US, SeedLegals should be there to help support you as well with a cap table, one login, and the whole. And that's my goal to sort all of that and help you with all those employment agreements.
No doubt, well. It's right around the corner.
Exactly. All right. Thanks, everyone. Great talking. Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you. Thanks very much.